episode of Pen to Paper. I'm Leah Lindemann, and today we're going to be talking about romance tropes. Okay, so maybe you're asking, what is a trope? A trope is a regularly used literary device. So, when you think of romance in a novel, it could be a romance novel, it could be an action-adventure novel with some romance in it. What are the types of romances that you usually see in a novel? For example, the love triangle. Enemies turn to lovers. Friends become lovers. Star-crossed lovers. All those kinds of romance, those romance stories that we see over and over again in stories, either in movies or novels. That is called a romance trope. So I thought today we would make it a little bit lighthearted and just fun. Maybe this is the year that you are going to find your romance, and maybe it's going to become one of those romance tropes, or it's going to be in the category of one of those romance tropes. So let's get started on what are a few of my favorite romance tropes. I should mention that romance tropes are not always, like, you don't only have to use one romance trope in your book. Sometimes you can use a mixture of romance tropes. So for example, in my first book, Redeemed from the Ashes, it starts off as a second love romance trope, which eventually turns into a love triangle. And I'm not going to explain how that turns out because, well, you can read the book for yourself. But you can definitely mix and match romance tropes, even to give it a more unique spin and make it your own. First one is the love triangle. Yep, I said it. I do love love triangles. Although I find that sometimes they can be very frustrating. But if done well, they can be really interesting and fulfilling at the end. So I could name off the top of my head the Selection series. Although that was very, very frustrating in book 2. Just a little too much for me. Hunger Games, although in Hunger Games the romance isn't a main thrust of the novel, so I can also point out the Twilight series, although that is a huge part of the novel and maybe a little bit overkill. But those are some of the main series that you would think of love triangle. But I would love to point out another series, which is Sarah J. Maas's Throne of Glass series. It's all about this she's an assassin named Selena who is a prisoner doing her time in the mines of Endovier. Anyways, but she is called back to the castle to become the king's assassin in this competition that he throws. This is just the first book, and there's 6 of them. It's one of my favorite fantasy series of all time, and I really like how she takes the romance trope of the love triangle. It is a love triangle, but it really develops and becomes something different. I like just how she took it and made it her own. For an example, the first book, you have the Crown Prince, and then you have the Captain of the Guard, and both of them are interested in Selena. In book 1, she tends to go with the Crown Prince, but you know that it's not a really lasting love affair. Whereas in book 2, she makes her choice with the Captain of the Guard. But then something happens, a point of no return where she can't forgive him, and the love triangle almost dissolves completely in book 3, where you have this other character step in. So I did enjoy how she took the romance trope but really made it her own. I also love when opposites attract. That is one of my favorites. And the prime example for me is Pride and Prejudice. You have Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy. And I guess sometimes you could go with it kind of combines with the trope of a misunderstood character, and then you finally understand that character. But at first, it's a character that you want nothing to do with. And this is what I love about Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy's love relationship. How they really don't like each other at first, although Mr. Darcy is interested in Elizabeth Bennet. And then over the course of the story, they fall in love with each other, and they realize that even though they are opposite in many ways, their strengths play out better together. Third romance trope that I absolutely adore is the second love or second chance at love. So it could be that the main character's husband or wife or partner has died, and then they have a chance at a second love. Or it could be that they were in love when they were younger, and then time or circumstances have separated them, and they get a second chance at being together again. And one of my favorite stories of all time with this one is Persuasion. I know it's not as well known as Sense and Sensibility or Pride and Prejudice from Jane Austen, but Persuasion I found had such an elegance to the writing and to how the story unraveled that it captured my heart immediately. And Persuasion goes more along with the lines of the second love, where two people were in love when they were younger, and then circumstances, people, and lack of money separated them for many, many years, and they come together again, fall in love with one another again, and are able to overcome those initial obstacles. It's just a type of love story that really makes you root for the characters. If it's a second love chance where the spouse or the partner has died, and then there's an absolutely new character that your protagonist is able to fall in love with, I find that one has to earn my trust a little bit more, or especially if maybe it's a series and you've already seen the protagonist with their initial love partner, and then this new love partner comes in later in the series, and you're just really attached to the original couple. I find that they have to prove the relationship a little bit more, but if it's done well, then it just has you rooting for them. Another, maybe something that's a little bit more popular today that most people would know about is The Notebook, which is written by Nicholas Sparks, but they did do a movie about it, and that's also another fantastic example of a second love romance trope. My fourth favorite is friends to lovers. It could be friends, like they became friends as adults and then they become lovers, or it could be childhood friends becoming lovers. But one of my favorite examples of this is Anne of Green Gables, written by Canadian author Lucy Maud Montgomery. She's a classic Canadian author, and I just love how, and it's not just about the romance in the series, there's so much more about this little orphan girl, Anne, who gets taken in by Marilla and Matthew Cuthbert, who originally didn't even want a girl. They wanted a boy orphan to help them on the farm, and yet they come to love this Anne character, and she's the protagonist of the series, and it follows her from her days at Green Gables, which is the home that they live in, to when she goes off to college, when she gets married, when she has her own kids. I think there's like 6 or 8 books in the whole series, which I haven't even read all of them, but I read the first 3 or 4, and I just love how at the beginning, and this one kind of uses a combination of romance tropes. You have Anne and Gilbert, who Gilbert is such a tease that she hates him at first, or yeah, she really despises him, doesn't like him, and then they become friends, which is, I guess, the larger part of the relationship for a few books, and she doesn't want that to change, so she just kind of blocks off the whole idea of being in love. But a few books in, you realize that she is in love with him, and they do get together. And there's just such a nice, warm butterfly feelings that come when that happens in a book. It's just such a sweet tale of romance, combined with the culture of the day. I think it's like early 1890s, 1900s that it's set in, which is when Lucy Maud Montgomery was living. Then you have the star-crossed lovers, and what better and more classic, iconic example of this is Romeo and Juliet by Shakespeare, where you have two people who are not supposed to fall in love. An example of Romeo and Juliet, they come from warring houses or differing houses where they should have nothing to do with each other, and yet they fall in love. I don't know, it kind of gives you this idea that love triumphs over all, even romantic love. It's a very universal concept that I think, especially when we're younger, we believe that love will defeat everything and anything in our way. Next is Ill-Fated Lovers, and this is one of my favorites because not that two people are not supposed to be together, but that there's just so much in their way that they would have so much to overcome. So one of my favorites for this is Jane Eyre, where you have Jane and Mr. Rochester who are in love, but he is still married to his very insane wife, but she's a secret. Nobody knows. Well, Jane doesn't know, but I just love that the building of tension and obstacles, and they're together, they're about to get married, but then Mr. Rochester's wife's brother stops the wedding and opens up the secret, and then Jane leaves because of course morally she can't marry him even though she loves him, and then we find out later that that way is opened up, because I won't say, you should really read the book, it's awesome. But that is a classic example of Ill-Fated Lovers. Another one that I really loved that I just read recently because it came out on Netflix as a movie was Rebecca, and it's the same type of story, and I actually thought it was going to be the exact same thing, where she comes to this house, she's married this older mysterious gentleman, and he's got this amazing English countryside estate, and I thought that he was hiding a wife just like Mr. Rochester. Turns out it's not. It's more of the psychological effects of this man's previous marriage haunting him in his present marriage. So I thought that was a really unique spin on the Jane Eyre type of Ill-Fated Lovers that Daphne du Maurier wrote. I loved it. Then we've got another great one is Enemies to Lovers, where they're just butting heads or they can't stand each other and then they fall in love. And again, I'm going to bring up Sarah J. Maas because she is one of my favorite authors, great fantasy author. And you can see this play out in A Court of Thorns and Roses series, specifically in the first two books, where in the first book you have the protagonist, she's fallen in love with Tamlin, who's kind of like a Beauty and the Beast, like the beast creature type. But then she meets this other fae guy who is really dark and brooding, and he makes this pact with her that he's kind of tricked her into, and Tamlin and this guy are at odds, and they hate each other, and so therefore she hates this dark, mysterious, oh, what's his name now? Oh my goodness, I can't believe I forgot his name, because he's way better than Tamlin in the end. Anyways, so, but then in the second book, she feels trapped by the prison of this relationship that she has with Tamlin and this pact that she's made with this other fae guy. Can't believe I've forgotten his name. Saves her. And they actually end up falling in love, and you'll find out that he actually is the good guy. So really great series. The first book wasn't that great, I have to say, but it really picked up in the second book. Third book was amazing. So definitely check it out. Romance trope number 8 is when you have a forbidden love with an authority figure. Now, I know you can go straight to like student with teacher, which is definitely not really appropriate with high schoolers. You could make that work with college student and college professor because they're over 18 and they're consenting adults. But I'm kind of going to go more with just the general authority figure, and one series that I really loved that did this was the Divergent series. Yes, I am a sucker for YA series. I love YA series. So yes, I have read the Selection series and the Hunger Games and the Twilight and the Divergent series and the Maze Runner, and I can go on and on. But I really, there's something, and which is funny. I married someone who was 7 years older than I was when I was 18. I've always been attracted to men who had maybe more life experience, who were just older, who were more mature than I was, and also men or guys who were my age. So maybe that's why I like this romance trope so much. But I just like how you have Tris, who falls in love with Four, and he fights it at first, but then, you know, through circumstances and working together to save the world, they do fall in love and they have a relationship. And my last favorite romance trope, which is very, very satisfying when it ends the right way, is love that's unrequited until the end, until the love interest finally sees that the protagonist is at all that he or she should be or should have in their life. So I'm going to bring up Ben-Hur. I loved the book. And you have that where Ben-Hur, now the guy is the main character, Ben-Hur, right? It is Ben-Hur. It's been a while since I've read it too. But you have Ben-Hur, who's the main character, and he comes and gets to know this lovely young girl named Esther who is in love with him. But he only sees her as almost like his little sister, which is kind of sad. And then he falls in love with this exotic beauty who's more worldly, and she seems to be able to offer him more. But at the end of the book, you find out that she's this snake who's been working against him and working with his enemy. And he finally realizes that what he thought he wanted or what he thought he loved wasn't worth it. And he does end up with Esther in the end. And he starts to develop not these little sister feelings, but these romantic feelings toward her. So that's very satisfying, because even though Esther's not a main character, you feel bad for her throughout the book, and then at the end it's like, it's just the way it was meant to be. And you know that she's better for the main protagonist. She's gonna make his life way more happy than if he was with that other girl. So that is a very satisfying ending. Those are all the romance tropes that I love. I'm sure you have your own favorites. Go ahead and shout down below. Maybe you have the same favorites as I do, and that's cool. And you can tell me your favorite novels or your novels that you have seen these romance tropes and that are your favorites. There's just something fun in daydreaming about love and how it can affect a person's life, even through the world of books. If you like the video, hit the like. Subscribe down below for any future videos. I'll see you next week.